If you haven't followed the podcast yet and don't know who I am, I'm Chris Wright, the head of the PUBS Advisory Service. I provide insights into the UK pubs trade, I speak with other experts, and I share experiences and stories from publicans across the country. Along the way, we'll explore different pubs, how they're run, and speak with their operators. Podcasts are released weekly, and you can contribute to the podcast using WhatsApp. Just message us on 07766073815. Leave your story in the form of a voice message or voice note. 5 minutes is approximately the maximum time limit. If you get cut off or have a longer story, just message back and continue where you left off. Please include as much detail about your experience as possible and avoid recording in noisy places or a moving vehicle. If you run a pub business, I highly recommend subscribing to the PUBS Advisory Service. It's the most extensive pub service, offering more than just representation. We have online calculators, document banks, and other resources for those interested in or already running a pub business. You can even claim the cost of subscribing back as a business expense. Some of the WhatsApp content will make it to special episodes of our podcast, exclusive only to subscribers of the PUBS Advisory Service. This paid subscription also gives you early and advert-free access to our episodes, plus online sessions where I answer your questions about the industry. Hello, this is Chris from the Our Pubs podcast. Today I'm joined by Dave Law of the Eagle Ale House in Battersea, southwest London. I think Dave has been probably the person I've spoken to the most in this trade over the years. I couldn't tot up the hours, but it's in the many thousands, Dave. I think our wives mutually probably think we spend more time together than we do with them. But anyway, here we are, and we'll start off on the good foot. And I'm going to wind you back to a dark period. The purpose of this podcast is really talk about the difference between being tied and free of tie, and you've experienced both. You had a long tenure of being tied. Could you just give us a snapshot of what that was and how that worked for you, and the pros and the cons of being tied, if there were any? Could you just lay that out for everyone that's listening?
Oh, wow. Where to begin? I mean, there are no pros to being tied at all. I mean, I think my old boss said it most succinctly. Ted, weird name, Ted Kennedy, who was the director of Whitbread Inns at the time. He started his own pub company now, and all the agreements are free of tie, because, as he said, it's an adult agreement. It's an adult arrangement between two willing parties, and there isn't 50 shades of torture implements being employed to leverage you. And that is essentially what the tie is. The tie is an opportunity for the pub company to leverage you and bully you and push you around and distract you so much that it's easy to take your eye off the ball. We found that as I said, I used to work for Whitbread. I worked on a managed estate. I was a manager and then an area manager, and even we didn't know how nefarious the tied estate was. We didn't know. We didn't understand all the information asymmetry and all the stuff that they didn't tell you. We ran good operations. So, it was a real. I've been in the trade for a long time, and I never realised how nefarious the tie trade was. Going free of tie, you've not got, you've got people breathing down your neck. You've not got a BDM, a sort of a quasi BDM / policeman, harassing you all the time with cellar inspections and. I remember one time I had a BDM. I was standing on, I was stupidly standing on a bar stool putting up some Christmas decorations with my daughter on the ladder, and I had this BDM harassing me to sign some document there and then that I didn't have time to read, and it was December, and I'm like, go away. You can see I'm standing on a bar stool. Go away. This is crazy stuff, really. But the big thing is, I suppose, where they make out that, there's all sorts of special commercial or financial advantages to being tied, and it's just a total nonsense. Every single thing they offered us, from insurance to gaming machines to whatever it was, we could find cheaper somewhere else. And
Even
that's
with the purchasing power of a single site, you're a single site operator.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, right.
precisely. Precisely. I mean, we don't have any clout. We've not got, we're not an empire. We don't have we're not multiple retailer. We don't have a number of sites, just one little site, and we're always able to undercut what they offered us. So, and aside from that, of course, as you well know, the countervailing benefits, or the so-called benefits of being tied, just don't exist. And even if they did, it's concessionary. It's not in the contract. So, you've no right to it, and they can take it away at any time they like.
Mm. That's a very key point. In fact, the pub company model, at least from the Tide perspective, is sold on the idea that there is a relationship, there is support, and this is valuable or almost invaluable, that actually you couldn't survive without it. So, in terms of the support that you did need when you were Tide, were they ever able to deliver on that, or did you always have to just find your own capital and go elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the one thing was the seller. This the seller contract, and there was a maintenance contract on the seller equipment, which can be expensive, can be expensive. But I always found that when it was the usual trick, the usual problem with this trade in general, and that's for anyone. That doesn't matter whether you're tied or free tie, is that there's no, anything that goes down is likely to go down across the weekend. So, if it's going to be your glass washer
Out of
or your
hours.
cellar cooling, it's
Mm.
likely to go down on a Saturday, or Friday night after 5 o'clock, and you're screwed. So, in those situations, you really need to build relationships with someone who you can call out, and that's golden. If you have a seller contract with Enterprise, you will not see anyone from Friday night till Monday morning, if
Mm.
unless if you're lucky. And then they'll come down and they might say, "Oh yeah, your cellar cooler's down. We won't be able to get another unit for a week." And that's no good. So
No.
you might as well not bother. You'd be better off going down to HSS and hiring a couple of air conditioning units and setting them up yourself. Um, but I mean, I mean, in that regard, I'm even looking to get a second cellar cooling unit just to have as a backup,
I've
because
sort
when
of fall over. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, if
I
you're
mean,
selling
this is,
parts,
you make
you're,
an interesting
you're
point there
screwed.
about the cover out of hours. I mean, it's one of the questions I've often said to people coming into the industry. Whoever you're talking to, if someone's offering you this support, I said, you're going to be a 7 day a week operation, as you say, tend to be heavier at the weekend. That's quite traditional for pubs, obviously. And is your landlord supplying services out of hours at the weekend? And if the answer is no, I find that amazing, because for an organisation as big as Enterprise Inns, as it was now Stonegate for you, for them to have and proudly boast that they got thousands of pubs and they understand this industry, why did they not have cover out of hours at the weekend? I mean,
Yeah.
that just seems totally remiss.
Tell me about it. I mean, it's mad. It's total madness. It's a hospitality industry. I mean, it's not exactly like a new industry, is it? We've been around for donkeys. Like, you'd think someone would have worked that one out by now.
It's not emerging
But
technology. That's right. Serving.
yeah,
I mean,
but one time, any time that I have used those things, like the so-called lead brewer thing, we had the largest brewer in the world come down to refurbish our cellar after I literally threw my toys out my pram and you know, demanded a cellar refurb, and they cocked it up. They cocked it up, and since then I've had to put it right myself privately,
mm.
because they literally screwed it up. And they actually damaged what I had before. I had a better setup before than the new setup that they put in.
And the thing is, even though you're 100% wet led, Dave, you're absolutely built around quality and perfect pints and perfect pour and everything there. Because not that you've won lots of awards. I mean, I won't go into that. People can look it up online. But the thing for me is that Yeah, they're mucking around with your delivery system effectively, and you know the standards you need to achieve, and they're not able to give you that standard, which I found that's always been incredible. It's always seemed to hold you back, and that you've been unable to get that from this massive company, apparently with all these connections and all this buying power, that they actually can't help you. I mean, do you think it would have been different if you'd served food? Do you think you'd had a different experience of being tied if you were food led?
No, I can't imagine that being the case because, they know that if you're food led, you're making money. Yeah, or that's how it used to be. I mean, since Ukraine and the energy crisis and stuff, I think I think everyone can see that that's been flipped on its head. But, obviously the traditional thing was food might give you something that they can't see or they don't know about. They don't see those trading figures necessarily until unless you divide it up neatly for them at company's house
Hmm, hmm.
and give a breakdown. But
So,
no, I don't see that being any different because at the end of the day, um, you know, they're no interest in the profit that you make. As Bridget Simmons has stated, I think at a select committee hearing, her members, aren't concerned with the profitability of a tenant. So,
and just for those who don't know, Bridget Simmons was the former spokesperson for the British Beer and Pub Association, and she did say quite a number of extraordinary things over the years. She's no longer in that role, but let's just winding back. Okay, so you're wet led, you're tied. Um, did you get the range of beers that you were after? I mean, they've got this huge buying power. How did that work for you? Their relationship with smaller brewers, independent brewers. Did you find that, was that a good relationship? Did it help you in any way?
well, it wasn't anything that I hadn't fought for. So, this was a managed house for, previously that I ran as a manager before it went over to lease, and it was like a baby hogshead. So it was known. It had a sort of in Whitbread. It had this beer engine style. So we were quite cask led, and we had access to quite a large list from a company I don't think exists anymore. They were bought by Seba, Flying Firkin. So it was this thing called a festival list, and when it went over to when it went over to leased, I fought tooth and nail to keep access to those beers because it
Mm.
was a unique selling point, and I'd served lots of guest ales over the years. And I somehow managed to get them to agree to that, which surprised me. And I later found out though there were less than 100 pubs within this sort of 8,500 strong enterprise estate. Less than 100 pubs that had access to that list. And so if you think about, if you are a cask driven pub, which I know at the time when we started, there was only 14% of enterprises estate that sold cask.
Mm.
So we were a massive anomaly. I was once told we were the fourth largest cask turnover pub in Enterprises Estate in the south of England
Wow.
by interesting enough, by an independent family brewer who shouldn't really have had third party access to my sales figures. But, that's another story. Um, and so if you think that like a normal tide pub will be lucky if let's say the biggest enterprise Stonegate, you'd be lucky to have about not a choice of 96 beers.
Hmm.
Then you've got Seba DDS direct delivery system or Flex or Beer Flex, whatever they call it this week. That would knock you up to about 200
Hmm.
beers. And there are 20,000 beers in the UK at any one given moment, roughly. That was the estimate by one of the old beer ticket apps. And if we had access to the Flying Firkin festival list, so that gave us roughly a choice of 2,000 beers out of 20,000.
Mm.
So, I would be, I think my customers would be really bored if we only had access to 96.
I
Um,
think that's an understatement.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
a lot of people like to try something. Discerning beer drinkers like to try something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got your regular, so you've got your regular beers that they love and adore, and they get very upset if you haven't got the same sessionable beer on every bloody day. But a lot of people like to try something new, and And that's supposed to be the competitive market, isn't it?
Well,
You've
well,
got
indeed.
competition.
I mean, you're quite the curator, Dave. I mean, you're no beer snob. I mean, your knowledge of beers is absolutely mastery. I mean, you know so much about beer that I can't hold a candle to. But you've never come across as a snob with it, and you've always delivered it brilliantly and brought and introduced wonderful new products to people, which has I think kept the Eagle so vibrant and so popular. I mean, it obviously, as you say, it had that background prior to you becoming a tied lease publican. It's extraordinary that you're revealing here that you had to fight to keep that choice. That actually that was not in the mind's eye of the new owners. They find that a bit of a problem for them. It's almost like how your customers, what they demand, what you're servicing was of no interest. So that's kind of very strong interference in your business. So naturally, you lent. It's correct to say you lent towards wanting to relieve yourself of this relationship as quickly as possible, but this involves in you and some others around you in South London becoming campaigners and founding the Fair Pint campaign, which is ultimately successful, proves itself. And so, after a long period of time, I think, I can't, I'm trying to remember how many years you were campaigning. I'm going to say 10. We have a
I
vote in Parliament.
think it ended up being 14.
14, right. So eventually the pubs code arrives and you can use it. So these are rights that you've been instrumental in designing, developing, consulting on. You really understand it. So you know all the intention behind going free of tie, more so than probably just about any other publican I can think of. And so you get the chance to exercise your rights. How easy was that?
Like dragging a dead body through mud. Um, obviously we had the initial problem with Paul Newby, who was appointed as Pubs Code adjudicator despite having so many conflicts of interest,
Hmm.
but were upheld by the CARB, Chartered Institute of Arbitrators.
Yes.
But amazingly, it was upheld for everyone but us. So,
Hmm.
there were six other complaints that went in that were pretty much identical to ours, and they were upheld, but our one wasn't, which was interesting. And as you know, we campaigned for about 2 years to get rid of him because he had formerly been the director of the biggest pub estate agent in Britain, and he was now tasked with regulating the same companies that he used to have such a close relationship with and made a lot of money from. Uh,
Mm.
and that would have impacted on his company's ability to pay back the loan that he had with them. So it's
Well, I
very,
think I think at the same time you mentioned this, the select committee actually wrote a letter saying that the perception of bias was massive. There was the
yeah,
perceived conflict of interest, etc. And so there's a matter of public record that there were a lot of people, as you say, upset with Mr. Newby. Do you think he set the tone for how the pubs code was delivered, or do you think somebody else was setting that tone then?
well, I think with hindsight, now that we know, now that we've seen how Fiona Dickey, his deputy, who then got the big job, she began quite positively and then suddenly did a volte face. So yeah, I think I'm quite positive that there was someone in the background pulling strings. We saw in the Lords how Baroness Neville Rolfe promised the opposition Lords that they wouldn't try to dilute the code and they wouldn't knock MRO out of the code because, as she said, it was the central plank of the legislation.
Mm.
And she promised them that if they didn't vote against it, she'd invite them to the drafting stage and the committee stage to write the legislation. And over the summer recess, they brought out the latest form of the code. They dropped MRO, and the opposition lords weren't invited to that table that they were promised. So, I, having seen the post office scandal, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was someone there in the background, um, literally pulling the strings. And I can't say who, but I know from another esteemed colleague that he's been told privately by a member of parliament that a former chancellor has admitted to them that they did their best to thwart the code.
It's astonishing stuff. I mean, all it was a little bit of fairness. I mean, quite frankly, I thought if the code was run as intended, it would police itself. Because if a Thai tenant was receiving good benefits and they did go free of Thai, then if they made a mistake in making that jump, they would go out of business. They would be bust and they would hand the pub back. So it was self-policing. I don't know why there was such concern about people triggering MRO, other than there was this idea the pub companies might be overwhelmed. But given that we've been through this, you were one of a few people, and I say a few, that triggered MRO because considering the size of the pub estates, you're looking at probably less than 1% have actually used the legislation to the effect that you have.
Mm.
As you say, it was difficult, drawn out. You got through it. You go free of Thai. And as I recall, wasn't it July 2020? Was that?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
The
yeah,
pandemic break, the first one.
yeah. Well, it was quite funny because obviously it taken nearly 3 years. I remember, we were invited to a sort of round table meeting with another four pubs, one of them represented by you, as I recall. Might have been
Mm.
two, actually, I think, represented by you. And Fiona was saying that she wanted to create golden threads and wanted to understand the issues that we all faced.
Yeah.
And I remember in that meeting, she stated that she recognised that the negotiating and bargaining power of a tenant against such a big company was massively diminished for the tenant. And yet, her summary of the issues was to go away and negotiate with them. So, I think we had another 18 months of negotiation. So, all in all, it took 3 and a bit years to get the MRO. And, don't get me wrong, I'm glad we did it. But we
Mm.
were essentially robbed of 3 years of
Free trade.
and
Mm.
that obviously favoured the pub company. Uh,
Yeah.
so there was intention by government to deal with that issue um, in one of the committee papers, and as you say, less than 1% of people have achieved MRO. But in one of the government impact studies, the transfer of profit was only about, they estimate this is their figures. They estimated it was only 15,000, I think, uh,
Per pub. Yeah.
per pub, which is a
Yeah.
drop in the ocean.
Are you a publican navigating the choppy waters in the UK pub industry, or perhaps you're looking to get into the trade for the first time? The Pubs Advisory Service is here to help. We provide essential advice and support, from licensing and legal queries to tenancy agreements and business growth strategies. Want to unlock exclusive insights, in-depth guides, and all our past podcast episodes, including hidden extras? Subscribe to Pass today. Membership gives you unparalleled access to expert advice, ensuring your pub thrives. Visit pubs.expert to learn more and subscribe. Don't miss out. Empower your pub business with Pubs Advisory Service. Mm.
Obviously, it was worth a lot more than that to us. I'm glad to say.
And it must have been worth a lot more to the pub company because the fight they put up with regards to, the issues that you were trying to enforce. I mean, these are rights, they're statutory rights. I think I want to make that really clear to everybody. So the pubs code is not a carve up between two private businesses, who are trying to sort of deal with a private arbitration. This is statutory rights enshrined in legislation to deliver you the right, a statutory right, to go free of Thai. And as you say, just exercising your statutory right came with an enormous amount of delay and problems, and seemingly the regulator themselves throwing sticks into your spokes. But parking that just for this moment, you go free of Thai. Could you just encapsulate the difference this made, let's say, to your bottom line? That moment that happened. What did you see? What was your net effect in the first 2 quarters of going free?
Well, I mean, it was just astounding, really. I mean, beyond my wildest dreams, to be honest. I mean, I knew obviously there'd be a huge benefit, but part of the issue, um, obviously we had a good selection of car scales,
Mm.
but choice of lager and any other style of beer other than cask was just appalling, and being tied. the prices are so astronomical that you were literally forced into taking, the highest GP product that you could find on the stocking list. And of course, that's dictated by the pub code because they're going to give only the most minuscule of discounts. But those that are discounted are going to be the products that are obviously getting the biggest kickback on. So,
Mm.
on our list, the cheapest lager I think I could find without getting into the Fosters of the world were Heineken and Beck's.
Mm.
And, we used to get so many comments on Google and Beer in the Evening and whatnot by cask ale drinkers saying, I really love this pub, love the cask, so well kept. But I just wish they had a better lager selection because I can't persuade my lager drinking mates to go there because like the choice of lager is just so poor.
Yeah.
And I, s- I s- I despair when when you look around. Everyone talks about. I'm no beer snob. I like a
Mm.
pint of San Miguel in Spain, just like the next man.
You have your guilty pleasures, Dave.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it is like stunning when you walk around, especially in London. You walk around London and everyone's got the same products. And it's, you just think, my God, really? Why are you paying £7 for something so poor? And, a lot of it being brewed in the UK.
Mm.
We all know the standard of water quality here. The Germans laugh at us. The Germans laugh at the Brits trying to make lager because
Mm.
no, 96% of it is water, and most of our water is rubbish. Unless you're up in a nice part of Scotland or Derbyshire, most of it's crap. So,
Mm.
you know, I can get I can get an amazing quality. I've got several. I've got a Czech Pilsner. I've got two. I've got Czech Pilsner on right now, and I've got two German lagers, and they're just astounding in comparison. And I'm getting them for nearly half of what I would have paid my pubco.
So they
So
were doubling. They were
that's
doubling your to a man. They were doubling your price. They didn't brew the beer.
yeah, but it's about 90. Yeah, I'd say about 90%. I mean, as I say, I've got a premium. I've got a premium Munich Hells on right now, which is being shipped to the UK through a third party.
Yeah.
Which, let's face it, that's what a pubco is, a third party. They don't brew. And it's being shipped here through an agent. So the agent's putting their markup on,
Hmm.
and I'm still getting it 90% cheaper than a similar ABV. I won't say similar product because it's not.
Yeah.
Similar ABV to that lager, the world's largest brewer,
Mm.
being the choice for the pubco. And it's nearly 90% cheaper and it's a far superior product. So on that front, I just cannot it was mind blowing how much more lager style beer that I sell now compared to then. And
Yes.
I mean, I just literally used, the Heineken and Beck's. I just used to order the same amount every week with no change.
Mm.
And now sometimes it's a struggle to keep up.
I actually I had a sneak behind the curtain, obviously with you the other week, and it was quite an astonishing amount of lager in the cellar down there. I mean, gearing up for the hottest summer in Britain, I think. But crikey, you sell it. I mean, it just flies out. It's a
Yeah, well,
fight to get in.
it's also
Yeah,
given us a more diverse customer base,
yeah,
which bulletproofs you. It bulletproofs you. I mean, one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever had. Uh, I was really pleased with myself for asking a question. I was only about 14, and I had an uncle that had a pub in deepest, darkest West Croydon. And I said to him, "Why is your pub so good compared to all the other pubs in the area?" And he said, "Well, you've got to keep on top of it. You've got to maintain it and keep it looking good." He said, "But the main reason is if you've got your young people, you've got to have your old people. And, because your old people are going to die, sadly. and if you just rely on old people, you're just going to have a diminishing market. So you need the young people. But if you just have young people, they're going to grow up and they're going to have to move away to somewhere cheaper, and you're left with nothing. So you've got to have a wide spectrum of customers, and that's what I've always tried to do here. It's always been my mantra that the pub's a great leveler, and no one. You've got to be able to get along with each other. The barrister's got to be able to talk to the bricklayer and vice versa. But you really need that mixture of people and to bulletproof yourself against those scenarios. And we work hard on that, but being free of tie has absolutely, whacked that up a notch or two.
As a game changer for you. So the
The old
good,
people love
the
it.
good, you lay it out that you have an instant change, an instant effect on the pub. I mean, sure, it was a torrid time pandemic, but I recognise that, and I've been a regular attendee at the Eagle to see just how that's picked up. It's quite incredible, and it's like Dave, you were being held back. You had one or two arms tied behind your back. You go free of tie, you can fly, and you've just flown with it, and you've really laid that out, and that's worked so well. But I just want to pick you up on a couple of points there. You said about the ability to choose these beers and having to pick beers on GP alone. This is anti-competitive, Dave. I mean, what you're laying out is that the way in which the tie was for you as a wet-led pub in that part of London was really anti-competitive. It was holding back custom, holding back sales. It's astonishing that model's allowed to do it. Have you spoken with anyone, in government, the CMA, etc., about these anti-competitive issues?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to an investigator from the CMA a couple of years ago. He totally got it. He was astonished. I showed him the price list. I showed him the SEBA thing where SEBA are forced by the pub companies to sell the beer really cheap to them at the same price. All the breweries have to pay the same price to the pub co's. And then I showed them the price. I showed the investigator the price that we had to pay, and he just couldn't believe it. And I think it was meant to be a 1 hour meeting. It ended up being 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he actually said to me, I'm really angry on your behalf. He said, I'm not just blowing smoke up your derriere. I'm actually really angry about this. And I thought something positive was going to come out of it. But of course, as I imagine, he probably took his report back to CMA Towers, and someone political got involved and said no.
Goodness me. I mean, this should make beer drinkers, pub lovers really angry. We've
Yes,
got we've got
it's
regulators who are meant to be upholding consumer, choice and services. They're just failing here massively. I mean, you say you've been reporting this over years now. Have you had any recent engagement with the CMA and the like?
I can't really talk about that at the
Oh,
moment.
okay. So it's ongoing. That's cool. No
Um,
worries.
yeah, well,
When it is public, maybe we can get you back on and you can perhaps explain a bit more because it's something I'm not involved with per se at the moment. But I think you and me have always met common ground on the idea that there has to be a wholesale market review. And we haven't had one since 1989. It begs the question, why not? Here we are 36 years on, and
yeah.
there is still demonstrable unfairness. There doesn't seem to be a level playing field. Anti-competitive stuff reaches my desk on a very regular basis. So, I mean, I like to get the feeling, at least from you, from an operator's point of view, that you're still trying to speak to these people and trying to make sure that they're fully aware of how this market is serving or disserving the public. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose the thing that I mean, obviously, I know because we've worked on a lot of this together, but um, I fear that the lobbying by the British Beer and Pub Association and its members is really, really powerful and effective. And as we have the revolving doors of politicians who aren't aware of the issues and still talk about brewers being involved, not realizing that most of them are offshore entities or they're just property owning businesses, pub owning businesses, aren't brewers. I mean, that just goes to show the level of sort of ignorance. and how easily they're persuaded by these lobbyists. I've always said we've got enough laws in this country, but they're just not being upheld. And,
Mm.
it is astounding that we haven't had a review for 35 years because we're back to where we were, when it was done last time, about between 76-80% of the supply of beer was by the big six brewers. And now the big five brewers have got about 90%.
So
So
the
it's
consolidation has continued.
yeah, it's just a great big swap. And the old defence used to be, oh, we've got to protect the British brewers. Well, hardly any of them are British anymore.
The
See,
ownership model has changed massively. You're absolutely right. I mean, you're fair to point that out, not just breweries, but obviously the properties that they've also owned as well. A lot of them ended up in the Cayman Islands for some weird reason. I think I think it's astonishing to realise that for some reason the Cayman Islanders have got more love for British pubs than just about anyone on the planet. But who knew? Who knew?
yeah,
But we
yeah, well, precisely. I'm not.
we live in that strange world.
I'm not
I
sure it's
mean,
the love of pubs. It's more like the love of what's the word? Being creative with your tax demands.
Absolutely,
That's
yeah. The
sort of
financialization of commodities and property is quite something. I mean, so here you are, happily been free trading for a few years. The difference is massive. Anyone that's hasn't done it yet or hasn't looked at the code, what would you say to them right now? Would you say give your head a wobble, get on with it?
Yeah,
What you're waiting for?
I'd say don't be a mug. I, I've dealt with, I've tried to, like your good self, I've done loads of pro bono work for people over the years, and it is really, really distressing how many people basically bottle it and think, oh, if I do this, they're going to do this to me, and da da da. You just got to hold your nerve and follow through on it. They're not going to treat you any better if you touch your toes. It ain't going to happen. If you think you're going to have your ears licked and you've got some nice cozy relationship with some bloke in an office somewhere that's looking at a spreadsheet, then you really are a total wand. You've got to go for it. I mean, it's hugely distressing to me to talk to people and them not take your advice, I know you know very, very well. I mean, I got a really good example. Lovely fella, smashing bloke. I've known him on and off for years. He's really good at what he does, but he used the wrong person to negotiate his MRO. He didn't take my advice to come to you, and so he ended up with a horse trade. And the two things he wanted really was MRO and an extension of his lease. And he thought he had it all, but he chose the wrong fella and ended up discovering 2 years later that he didn't have an extension to his lease.
Mm.
And he didn't have his interest capped. And so along comes the hike in interest rates, around the Ukraine war, and he ended up with like 30 grand increase on his rent that he couldn't do anything about.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, the RPI, yeah, the retail
with the
price
retail
index, which
pricing.
was often a modifier to people's rents. Yeah, absolutely. So it was an
Yeah.
uncapped situation. I mean, thank you, Dave, for the accolade. As you know, I'm broad church. I'm happy to speak to anyone, no matter what the tenure of their pub, and see if I can find some sort of help or solution, even if it's not for me to supply it. But with regards to these issues around, like you say, people need to do it. I think one of the things that has always intrigued me is fear has stalked the market quite a lot. And there's a lot of publicans who seem fearful of the relationship they're in. And they fear that if they do something like MRO, they're going to make it worse. But my knowledge of people who stay tied and people who went free of tie is that largely the free of tie, like yourself, you don't see your pub company. You have no dealing with them now. The relationship is absolutely just an invoice for rent. And the people that are stay tied are continuously having hassle and having the problems that you so eloquently described earlier in this conversation. So it's kind of strikes me that what people want, which is to be left alone and free to run their business and be entrepreneurial and all that, they're sort of thinking, well, it'll be worse if I'm free of tie. But the reality is it won't be worse. They won't be treated any worse. If anything, what you've discovered is the new relationship of silence is actually perfect. Um,
As I say, they haven't got any levers that they can pull on us. Aside from the repairing aspect of the lease, so dilapidations, you've got to get on top of those. But
mm,
aside from that, they've got no leverage. The only time That's the only time they've got leverage now. Whereas when you're tied, they've got so many levers they can pull to carry you headlong into insolvency. I mean, we would have been goners years ago if we hadn't had independent sources of income.
mm,
I fortunately had a flat around the corner that literally helped me to survive because I was earning £200 a week.
mm,
Um, if I hadn't had that, we would have been screwed a long time ago. We wouldn't have been able to campaign because we would have been dead in the water and no one would have listened to us if we didn't have a pub. So it's yeah, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, when you're tied, instead of doing what you're good at, which is running a pub, you have to be a lawyer. You literally have to learn about the law. I mean, I suppose if there was one countervailing benefit, it's that I've had to learn a lot that I didn't previously know, and that was forced on me. So yeah, it's a weird one, but you just want to. I mean, it's bad enough when you're a publican. You've got to be, you know, a diplomat, acrobat, doormat, if you like, for your customers. But you also have to, you've got to have your HR head on. You've got to have your health and safety head on. There's loads of stuff you've got to do as a publican. It really is a multitasking job, but having to be a lawyer, a barrister, again, because you're constantly having threats made to you in this playground bully type scenario of being tied is is absolutely so draining and distracting from what
mm,
you actually do. Um, you can take your eyes off the ball in so many ways, from your GP to taking a second job, all that stuff. And yeah, it's worth its weight in gold just to not have them effectively with their hands in your till.
mm. Well, Dave, I mean, as you say, being a tied tenant was an education, probably not one you're keen to repeat. But as ever, it's an education chatting to you, Dave. Absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today to cover these points and the differences it's made to you and some words of wisdom and warning, I think, for anyone that's listening here, whether you're new or old to the trade. And for anyone that is in London, it's a short walk from Clapham Junction to the Eagle. So if you're ever going through that part of town, I urge you to get off, walk down the Northcote Road, go and see Dave at the Eagle. You're sure to have a great pint. Thanks for joining us, Dave, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, pleasure, Chris. Cheers, mate.
Hello, once again. This is Chris from PUBS Advisory Service. Thanks ever so much for listening to the podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch with the show, please use WhatsApp. You can contact us on 07766073815. That is 07766073815. You'll also find this number in the links and on our webpage, pubs.expert/podcast. Thanks again.